Okay, the recording and the transcription have both started now. So as ever, you are of course welcome to come online. You are welcome to speak throughout this, but just remember that you will be recorded if you do. Okay, so before we actually start on what I want to talk about today, I wanted to cover some things that I'd had as an email. And I thought it was worthwhile going through them for everybody because they are good questions, and I wanted to give some reassurance on some of the stuff. So the first thing is in terms of the stuff that we're doing and how that fits into the assessment. So at various times, I've asked you to do things as a task from the slides, as a task in Teams, as the final assessment. And some people are a wee bit confused as to what one they should be doing and when. In terms of when, well, it's when they come up. But in terms of the why, the reason that I've been doing this is because I want you to be able to compare and contrast different organisations. So, for example, as I said earlier, the level 10 students are doing a case study about a community development trust. That's a very different structure to the level 11 students who are doing it about a commercial company who service white goods, which is very different again to the local authority that we used as the example last week. So part of the reason I've got different approaches at different times is so that you can look at these different types of organisation and start to think about the things that stay the same and the things that might be different. Part of the reason that question was asked because someone was very concerned that they submitted the wrong thing. Don't worry about it. As long as you're submitting something, then I'm happy that you are doing what I've been asking you to do. On a side note for that, one of the questions I had from one of the CPD people was about attendance, and I know I keep saying that, and presumably I forgot to say this is for the UWS students. CPD students don't have mandatory attendance. You guys can come and go as you wish. Clearly, I want you to be here. Clearly, I don't want you to not come. But there's a different legal position for students who have been given money by the Scottish Government to attend, and we have students that are non-Scottish, and we have recording issues for those as well. So I do have to make sure that those students are here and that they are attending, but that is for them, it's not for other CPD students. In terms of governance, you'll remember that as part of the slides, there was a sort of triangle, a triangle that tried to show governance, management, and implementation. And they were, governance at the top of the triangle, management in the middle, implementation at the bottom. Now, one of the questions I had was about a particular I'm trying to say this without giving away who it was and giving away too much personal information, so my apologies that I'm stumbling over this. Their experience of an organisation where there may be multiple layers of management. So you might have a division head, and the division head might have multiple department heads, and the multiple department heads might have multiple section heads underneath them. And the question was about how does that fit in with that triangle? If you have all these different layers of management. In that triangle, I wasn't trying to suggest that management is one layer. It's about the functionality that's embedded in those layers. So governance is about setting the strategy. Management is about implementing it. And just as you do in every organisation, people will delegate. And you'll delegate down the management structure until you eventually get to an implementation part. The fact that we've got multiple layers of management doesn't obviate that. It's still the same idea. You will still have those same things happening. So just because there's multiple layers of management doesn't mean that the triangle that you saw is incorrect. It just means that the setup in that organisation is slightly different. Which brings us back to what I was saying earlier. There will be different ways that things are organised in different organisations, depending on what they're doing, depending on the size, depending on anything you want. So, as I say, just because you have a difference in organisations with which you're familiar, it doesn't mean that the principle doesn't stay the same. So the triangle with governance, with implementation, still there. And management stays the same even if you have multiple layers of management. It's still just a management layer. Okay. There was also a question about asking questions. And in part, that's because I've rambled on for the first couple of weeks. Clearly, we've had a lot to get through. That will calm down. So you'll have extra time at this part to ask questions. The other place that you can ask questions is now that you have access, please sign up for the team. And the reason that I suggest using Teams is because A, emails sometimes get sent to spam and I don't see them. But B, people have the same questions even if they don't always ask them. So if we put it on Teams, everybody sees the same question, everybody sees the same answer, and everybody's kept up to date. So hopefully you'll have more time during lectures to ask questions, because we'll still manage to get through today's lecture, even though we spent 40 minutes on questions. That is not a complaint, by the way, that I'm glad that we did that, which is, so always ask the question. What I'm saying is, we did that, but we'll still get through today's lecture easily because we have time and it will calm down a bit. There was also a question about where IT issues come up. And I do have to apologise for that. Some of the materials specifically talk about IT. Not surprisingly, I work in the computing department, so quite often I talk about IT. And quite often I'll put that in there for exactly the opposite reason that I'm about to tell you to ignore it. Sometimes students who are studying a particular subject, you want to ground what you're talking about in what they already know. So governance, risk and compliance is new. It's new to everybody in this class, I imagine. So what I'd been trying to do was show where that intersects with IT. But of course, if you're one of the CPD students and you don't have anything to do with IT, that can then get even more confusing. So if ever I say something like, and you might want to think about how IT can help with this, choose your own speciality. You might want to think about how HR helps with this, or how accounts helps with this, or how marketing helps with this, or whatever it is that you like. So my apologies that that's in the slides. It's not meant to say that you have to focus on IT, quite the opposite. It's you should be thinking of it from your own background and try and relate it to what you're doing. So whenever that comes up, I will try and remember and point that out explicitly again. But I do know that's been in a couple of slides, and clearly I haven't made that clear up till now. So I'm sorry about that. For IT students, clearly you want to relate it to IT. If you're not an IT student, relate it to whatever feels comfortable for you to relate to. And in terms of the assessment, you absolutely won't be penalised for that. On a kind of related note, if there's any jargon that pops up, anything that I'm saying that doesn't make sense, and again, I try not to, but I know that it does happen, don't be slow to pick me up on it. Just say, what are you talking about? And I'll be more than happy to explain and try and put it in different terms. So I think that's all the things that I had noted down for some feedback that I'd had. Does anyone have any questions about that part before we move on? Excuse me. No, all happy? Okay, well, in that case, what we can do is move on to today's topic. And you'll remember that we are following this syllabus. This is the 6th of February, so we are starting on to risk. Not surprisingly, we've done some stuff on governance, now we're going to do some stuff on risk. I know I complain about it every week, but it would be so much cooler if when I said something like, now we're going to start on risk, and it just suddenly appeared. Oh, now it appears. So we want to talk about risk management. So we need to identify risks, we need to manage risks. And one of the things I want you to be really clear about, even though we are going to talk about things like physical risk, which might be what's in your head when we talk about risk, that's not everything we're doing when we think about risk in terms of governance, risk and compliance. So it isn't just about should you walk under a ladder, it's a whole wider thing than that. So let's first of all talk about risk management. What do I mean by management? I mean that everyone takes risks. Of course we do. I'm sitting in a chair. Do I have a risk of bending over and hurting my back? Do I have a risk of all these multiple screens sending gamma rays through me and turning me into the Incredible Hulk? That's probably a smaller risk, but I don't know if it exists or not. Everyone takes risks. You cross the road. You meet people. You do whatever it is, but you take a risk. And organizations also take risks. That's not necessarily a bad thing. When we talked about governance and we talked about setting objectives, I quite often said something like, oh, we need to open 10 new shops this year. Well, every single shop that you open is a risk. Can you get the premises? Can you get the staff? Will enough people come and spend enough money to make it worthwhile? Just trying to grow your business is a risk. But it doesn't mean you don't take the risks. It just means you have to understand where the risks are and try to manage them. And the phrase up there is minimize the effect of uncertainty on objectives. So you try to understand what the risks may be. You, having understood them or done your best to understand them and list them, you can then start to think about how you mitigate them. That's both obvious, and obvious isn't a word that I use often because most things aren't, but managing risk is obvious. Anybody who has a house probably has house insurance. You're managing the risk. You probably won't have your house go up in fire, but it's probably worth paying some money so that if it does, you can recover. It's so important that if you drive a car, you're legally obliged to insure it. So you're managing the risk that you have a problem with your car. And this approach is clear throughout all of the stuff that we'll be talking about. It's clear for all organizations, all individuals, and it's so clear that it actually underpins the international standard for risk, ISO 31000. There's a section in your materials about ISO 31000. You should have a read at it, although be warned, there's quite a lot of it. So when we're talking about risk, we're not saying, let's not take a risk. You can't do anything without taking a risk. What we are saying is that the risks have to be identified and the risks have to be managed. Now, again, I'm going to use an example that's about personal risk, but that it's wider in a corporate context. But here's a risk. Everybody here has crossed a road. 6 years ago, there were 181,000 road traffic accidents, and almost 1,800 were fatal. I don't know if you knew that, but I would bet money that now that you do know that, you'll still cross the road. But we still have a risk. So the question becomes, what do we do about that risk? And the approaches that we can take in terms of that personal risk are the same types of approaches that you can take elsewhere. We could avoid it. I know that for some students, staying in bed all the time is quite high up on the list of things that you would do. It's not really practical for everybody. We could also educate. We could say, well, of course you have to cross the road. Let's think about how to do that safely. People of my age will remember the Tufty Club. Some of you are probably too young for that and probably too young for the Green Cross Code. But you will all have come across adverts that talk about the safe way to cross the road. You'll all have done this at school. So there's a couple of ways that we can approach road traffic accidents. We can avoid or educate. Risk management in the wider sense that we want to talk about have some other approaches. So as I say, you have to identify your risk first of all, and then once you identify it, you have to manage it. Now, there are different ways of doing this. So we're going to talk about 5. They are popular. They're probably the most popular ones, but they are not comprehensive. There are other ways to approach this. But this is a reasonable set of options. So we're going to just look at those 5 just now and think about how we might use those in this context. And the first thing we do, of course, is we just say, yeah, we accept it. Things are going to happen. Just like with our previous example, you're going to cross the road. There's very little you can do to avoid that option. So for some risks, you might just say, yeah, okay. Now, you have to be clear which risks you are accepting. You have to set up your own terms for what makes it worth accepting that. So a smaller risk, but you have to decide what small is. Is it small in terms of cost? Is it small in terms of disruption to your business? Is it small in terms of the number of people involved? It will entirely depend on the risk that you've identified. And just because you accept a risk doesn't mean that you don't still identify it. You still need to, and we'll talk about how we do this later, you still need to write it down somewhere and say, there, this is a risk, even though we're going to accept it. The other time, of course, that you might accept a risk is where the risk is incredibly small. So the effects might be high, but the risks are small. So in different contexts, that might be different. If you have a workplace, most of us are sitting in offices or homes where it's possible we'll be hit by a meteor. That meteor might at any point come through the roof and start burning the place up. I'm not convinced many of us spend a lot of time worrying about that. But if you're in another workplace, you absolutely do have to worry about that. If you work in the International Space Station, you have modelled that risk and decided what those risks look like if you get hit by that meteor. If it goes through the solar array, well, you lose some power, but you live. If it goes through the habitat module, then that's a high risk. So context is everything. Context is about understanding your organization, understanding the risks, and understanding the consequences should those risks happen. And it may be different depending on where you are, the type of business you're in, the type of people you have. Those things will be different. So it is about understanding your business and doing it correctly for them. Otherwise, you end up being in this position and you try to mitigate meteor risk like this. And cute though he is, I think he's overestimating the risks. The next thing we can do is simply avoid the risk. Just don't do it. Most of you will have heard the term financial year. So the financial year tends to go from April to March. If you're producing annual accounts for an organisation, you produce them in March towards the end of the financial year. Why would you willingly put yourself at risk by letting the accountant go on holiday in March? You would avoid that risk by not allowing them to go on holiday. This is February. I've got a class to do here. If I had put in a request to take a holiday today, my manager would have looked at me and said, "Who are you trying to kid? You've got a lecture. Who's going to do it if you're not here?" So there are times where you simply avoid the risk. You just don't take it. You can't always do that because sometimes you have to accept risks. So maybe you want to transfer them elsewhere. And we touched on this earlier when we spoke about house insurance and car insurance. If you can identify what would happen if the risk came true, if you can put a cost on it, then maybe you can insure it. If you say that you are moving your organization to new premises, every day that doesn't happen costs your organization £100,000. Well, you can approach an insurance company and say, can I insure in case something goes wrong with this move? And the insurance company will look at the risk, look at the payout, and will say, yes, you can, but it will cost you £2,000 for every 100,000 that you want to insure, or whatever the number is. The tricky part of that comes in saying, yeah, it's £2,000 for every 100,000. Because how do you know what the risks are? Are there risks that the building's not built yet, or that the building's not ready, or that the movers don't turn up, or that the electricity's not turned on, or that the desks don't turn up, or that the new computers aren't installed? What actually is the risk? And all of those things need to be identified to understand what the chances are that this will fail. So it can be a nebulous understanding of what can go wrong. And you can see that actually if you do a search for projects that have gone wrong. Sometimes people look at a government project that's maybe late and gone over budget and said, well, why didn't you do something about this earlier? And that's a reasonable question, but it prompts another reasonable question. What should we have done and when? And it also prompts a third one. What could we have done about it anyway? Well, why didn't you insure against this going in late? Well, we could have done, but who would have taken that risk? Which insurance company would have done that for us? And how much would it have cost us? So it can be tricky to understand what that risk is, and it can be tricky to pass it on to someone else. And you'll see that quite often if you do a contract, that there will be penalty clauses if you don't have it in time or to a certain level or whatever it happens to be. But it may not always be enough to compensate you for what's going wrong. The next approach that you can use is to mitigate. I'm not seeing anything coming up in the chat, by the way, so I'm assuming nobody has any questions about these, and I'm not hearing them to say anything either. So if you have questions, just say. The next one is about mitigation, and it's about thinking about how you can mitigate any potential losses. And I apologise again, this is an IT example, but I think it's an easily understood example. If you swap server for widget making machine, so say your whole business is about making widgets, and to make those widgets, you have a widget machine. Well, if that widget machine breaks, you don't have a business anymore. So you've got different ways of approaching it. You could have another widget machine sitting right next to your original widget machine. So if the widget machine breaks, you move to your backup widget machine. But having two widget machines there all the time, well, that sounds quite expensive to me. In fact, it sounds like twice as expensive as just having one. So maybe you get together with a whole bunch of other people who also make widgets and say, look, there's 10 of us. Let's say we go in and we all pay 1/10 of a new machine and we have it sitting in a warehouse somewhere. And if something breaks down, there's a spare widget machine and we can use it. It's insurance by any other name. It's not immediate because you still have to go to the warehouse and put it in the back of a truck and take it to your premises and put it in, but it's not too bad. And it's 1/10 of the price of having a whole new machine sitting there. The other approach could be that you fix it. If the machine goes wrong, you fix it. So you need somebody that knows how to fix it, and they need to have replacement parts available. And again, how long they take to do that will be a function of how much it costs. If you want somebody to replace it, to fix it within an hour, that will be a lot more expensive than if you want somebody to replace it within a day or fix it within a day or within a week. So you have this balance all the time. How much does it cost against how much disruption is it going to be? And that's where you have to weigh it up. And that's where we come back to understanding your organization and the issues that will it will create if something goes wrong. So you have to, first of all, understand that there is an issue. You have to understand what the potential problems might be if that issue comes true. And then you have to decide what you're going to do to sort that out. But there's always a balance. Whether it's widget machines, whether it's servers, whether it's if you have enough staff to man your call center, it really doesn't matter. There's still that balance between what it'll cost you and what happens if it goes wrong. And only you can make that decision. In other words, there is going to be a calculation somewhere about your risk management. Which is why you need to understand your risks really clearly and understand the consequences should those risks come true. As I say, whether it's about equipment or people or anything else, you still have to understand them. The final one you can do is exploit the risk. Embrace it, realize that it is a thing, and not try to avoid the risk, actually make it happen. Which sounds counterintuitive, but happens all the time. I've already said it's a risk opening a new shop. And in some ways, you will never know until you actually do it. You can go through it all on paper, you can try to understand what you think will happen, but until you actually open up that shop, you don't know. So you make the risk probability 1 by opening the shop. Drug companies create new drugs all the time. And the one thing that they know is some of them will have really bad effects. Excuse me. And of course, sometimes you don't know what that effect will be until you actually do it. So what do? They make the risk 1. They give the drugs to somebody under very tight conditions and under medical supervision, making sure that all possible what was the risk that I would forget to turn off my phone before today? Turns out it was 1. So the drug company will make the risk 1, give the drugs to people, and test what happens. If you get a good outcome, you'll get a good drug and you've done well. If you get a bad outcome, you discard the drug and don't use it. So there's always that choice. So regardless of how we approach it, regardless of the approach that we take, we need a plan. We can't just go into this blindly. We have to think, what are our risks? What are the consequences of that risk? If that risk comes true, money, people, reputation, whatever. What can we do to stop that risk? And who's responsible? So what we end up with is something called a risk register. Now, one thing you'll find out very soon, if you don't already know, risk registers come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, and formats, and we're going to look at some of them. I don't mind which one you use, because one of the things that you'll be doing, if you've forgotten or haven't checked, is you will be creating a risk register. So that's 1/10 of the marks you haven't remembered. There'll be stuff about risk management, but you'll also create a risk register for the organisation in your assessment. I don't mind the format that you use for that risk register. As I say, we're going to cover a few of them. This is a very basic one that you've got up here. We're going to look at some more. I don't mind which you use, but I do expect it to have a fair amount of detail in it, and I'll leave it up to you to decide which ones you like. This is as I say, a simple one. It simply has a basic description, which type of risk it is. So you can see there's operational, financial, external, whatever. The probability it will happen, expressed in decimals. So 0.25, I think it's a 1 in 4 chance this will happen. An estimated impact, this is costs. An additional workload. And what's happened. Some of them, there's a response planned if something goes wrong. Something it's actually happened. And you can actually identify what it did cost. We thought it would cost 10,000. It's actually cost 10,800. So I say that's a very simple one. And I'll be showing you some more. Regardless of the format, they all allow risks to be identified and analysed, to think about the response, to be monitored, and who's going to do that. Any questions?
Whose job is it within an organization to make that, to kind of go through the risk and assess what risks should be made and what shouldn't?
So there's a few parts in there. So there will often be it will be someone's responsibility to have overall control of this, and to create the risk register, to keep it updated. But as you can imagine, in a lot of organizations, there are different parts. And earlier on, we were speaking about, how some people in this class know about IT, but it's not everyone else's area of understanding. So even though it will be someone's responsibility, everybody will be involved. So there'll be input from HR and accounts and IT and all the different departments to try and understand what those risks are. Which is why when we look at some of the risk registers, you will see there's different people responsible for looking after that risk. So in essence, there's a kind of admin side to it, where someone will have responsibility for creating this and doing it. But quite often, and of course it will depend on the size of the organisation, but quite often, particular departments or particular areas will have responsibility for identifying and analysing their own risks, which then come into a bigger risk register. David is asking about risk matrices, and I'm not going to answer that question just now, David, because that's exactly what I'm going to be showing you very shortly in some of the examples, including risk matrices, those responsible, mitigating actions, and all that kind of stuff. Any other questions just now? Okay, so I do want to show you some formats, but with the initial questions, we've gone on longer than I would normally go on. So shall we take a break? Mel's got a cup ready. I'll see you back in 10. Well, I timed that badly. I made a dumpling at the weekend. It was very nice. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about risk. And just a quick reminder for those of you who've forgotten, all of the materials are in the module materials document. So there's the risk management presentation, and there's a whole load of pages with a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about, excuse me, including ISO 31000, drag systems, risk matrix, David, and so on. So what I want to look at today, finally today, is some risk registers. And again, these are all in there. Now, I don't know how many of these we'll get to do because I don't want to take up all the time because I want to leave space for questions. And hopefully that will be where we are. So we had 40 minutes before we even started today, and we've still got plenty of time to finish this lecture today. So we will hopefully in the future have plenty of time for questions, and it won't be quite so rushed as it's been the first couple of weeks. So there's the first risk document. Yes, we're back to local authorities. And I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time actually on this particular document. It's simply to talk about how important finance is for just about every organisation, not surprisingly. So this one is a whole paper. So this again goes to governance. So this, don't forget, this isn't like governance, and then over there there's risk, and down there there's compliance. These are all meshed together. So this is a risk issue, specifically treasury management, so financial management, if you like. And this comes to the board, or whatever the board is called in their organisation. And it explains the strategy, explains the risks, borrowing requirements, limits, indicators, forecasts for interest rates. You know, if interest rates change, that has a material effect on the organisation. And things like the risk register. So you'll see in the appendices all the way down, page 2. So here we have the risk register. So here's the first example of a type of risk register. It's got a name. It's got a description. It's got an explanation of the consequences were the risk to come to pass, and something called controls, what the organisation is doing to ensure that this doesn't happen. So what it is, what might happen, and what we're doing about it. And finally, we've got something called a RAG status. And this is quite a common way of expressing risk. It's just a traffic light system, red, amber, green. Credit risk is amber because the risk will never be fully eliminated. Liquidity risk, does the organisation have enough cash on hand to pay their employees, pay their suppliers? Yep, they're comfortable with that. That's green. That's not a problem. So there's a whole list of things here. Potential risk, potential outcomes, what they're doing about it, and how much of a risk they think it is. I think that's all I wanted to show you on that one. Yeah, it is. So the next one is something called the Strategic Risk Register. So again, on the risk section of the module materials, there's stuff about the RAG system, and there's also stuff about risk matrices. And you'll see the idea is, as we were talking about in the lecture, there is likely 4 weeks in and this cough's still there. Lovely. How likely the risk is to happen and the impact it would have in the organisation. In this particular case, it's a 5 by 5 matrix, and you can see impact goes along the x-axis and likelihood amongst the y. We can then decide how likely something is and how impactful it would be, multiply them together, and that gives us a score, in this case out of 25. So this one is almost certain to happen, so it's a 5. The impact will be 4, so it gives us 20, and you can see they've also coloured it. So we've got this red, amber, green thing, but there's also an extra yellow. So that's what this one uses. Now, in answer to Mel's question, it depends on the organisation. So the question is there one risk register or would they have different ones? Now, it's important, I think, to have a risk register, a single risk register somewhere where you can go and see the whole organisation's issues. That said, sometimes that document is made up of smaller documents. As I said earlier, it might be risks for IT, risks for finance, risks for HR, whatever it happens to be. They'll create their own risk documents, which are then fed into the main one. And you can kind of see that here. So we've got financial ones. We've got HR, which they call people. We've got climate change. So different sections, financial sustainability, inequalities. So different sections have different risk register styles. The same sort of thing goes into them, what the risk is, what would happen if it came true, and what they're doing about it. We have a risk matrix and the score. And they'll do that for all of these things. Inequalities, finance, and so on. I did mention that for different organisations, they might use different formats for the risk register. So it's also true that they will have different ways of approaching how they create their risk registers. Here again, select a different one. This is the report to the board for the risk register for this integrated joint board. And it's to outline and approve the risk register. So this isn't just something that's done in isolation. This is something that we're saying, these are the risks. Do you think they're reasonable? If someone can come back and go, well, actually, no, I think this is a bigger risk, this is a smaller risk. What about? All that kind of stuff can happen. They have figured out, they've reported back on how they've done it. So risk workshops in Mel, each service area was looking at their risk. They have more detail in than they used to have. The actions required have been identified. And here's the important thing, subject to ongoing monitoring. So if you said you're doing something about a risk, somebody's looking at it to say, are you doing it, and how well has that gone on? And there you see the different sections of the organisation who have created their own risks, but that's brought into one strategic risk register. So as I say, there might be different documents in different parts because there's no particular reason for everybody in finance to be looking at IT's risk register. They probably want to focus on their own, but the organisation will have one strategic risk register that brings everything together. And as we go through, it gives more information. And this is a bigger organisation. You remember we spoke about this one before. It's a joint board between local councils and health boards. So they're trying to let people understand where these areas of risks are. 3 different councils, a health board. They've got some acronyms explained. They're talking about other organisations that might have an input into this. But when we get to the actual risk register itself, you'll start to see some familiar things popping up. What is it? What happens? What are you doing to stop it? What do you think will happen after you take that mitigation measure? So we think this might happen, we're going to do this, what are we hoping the outcome is? And what will we need to do after that? Here they've used a risk matrix, but not actually printed the matrix. Here it's a 5x3. Question, is that a 5 for likelihood or a 5 for impact? That was a question.
Wouldn't that be likelihood?
Why? It's a bit of an unfair question because I think the only possible answer is, I don't know. And if I was part of the governance for this, it's one of the questions I would be asking. What does this 5 actually mean? What does this 3 actually mean? And the question I would be asking it of is the head of finance and transformation, whose responsibility this is. The other thing they've done is start to give IDs. So rather than saying we're looking at risk about impact of budgetary pressures on service users, they're saying we're looking at NEH SCP 2018-01. So everybody knows which one they're talking about. They have said the consequence likelihood risk matrix should be used, but they haven't clearly identified which is which. And they've done it several times here. 5 before, 2 before, 3 by 3, 2 by 3, 2 by 3, but which is which? And Alistair, you're right, it is probability and impact, but which is which? Interesting here, they've also included reputational risk. What happens if this risk comes to pass? What will it do to our image in the community? And the risk register continues like this. This is still the first one, by the way. We have the status, we have who's looked after it. So who's looked at this and said, yep, I'm happy with this, and when they did it. And then we're on to the next one. This is ICT. Same idea. They've given it an ID, to quickly find it, who's responsible for it, what it is, any other information, what might happen, what might happen, what they're doing about it, what they think will happen after that, and what they might need to do to continually address it. So they simply go through this for all the different risks, culture and practice, program delivery, and so on, and so on, and so on, including, look at that, they've actually identified governance itself as a risk. What they're saying is, if we're not properly governed here, and remember this is a new thing for two organisations, what they're saying is we need to get the governance absolutely nailed down. We have legislation that we have to comply with, the Public Bodies Scotland Act. They have requirements, freedom of information, complaints, all that other stuff. If there's not proper governance in place, we could have a problem here. So there are lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of these. So here's the final one I want to look at. I'm not seeing any other questions come up on the chat. So here's the final one I want to look at. And it's a different organisation. This is a South Ayrshire Health and Social Care Partnership. So we'll see some things that are similar. It will say who owns the risk, what the possible outcomes are, why it's happening. It will give a score and what they're doing to stop it. But they've gone into further detail. Here are the proposed mitigations listed, and they've given a status for the mitigation itself. So we're back to red, amber, green here. So the status for this one is green. It's not completed. So they've got a progress bar, they're 20%, and it's gone from 10 to 20, so they think that's doing okay. Because clearly you don't just say, we're doing this mitigation and then it's done. They're giving you an idea of how long these things will take. So the risk registers themselves contain all that. Who's responsible, what's going to happen, what the matrix looks like, and the status of them. Slightly different status here. This one's completed, so it gets a green tick, and 100% completed has happened. Oh, here's our first amber, because nothing's happened. It's been the same since the last iteration of this risk register. Which brings up another point. These are not static documents. These are living documents used to assess and understand the risks and to record the progress made towards mitigating, removing, or whatever approach you're going to take to these risks. So the document continues in the same sort of vein. And going back to Mel's question, here they have made it very clear which parts of the organisation are included. So it's one strategic risk register, but resources have a risk register, as do planning and inequality and health and governance. Oh, look, governance popped up again. Protection and engagement. And these are all different sections within this organisation. Anybody get any issues with this page here? Or indeed that page?
It looks like none of them made any progression.
Why is that?
Because the progress bars all say they're the same since the last time.
That's true, but that might be reasonable depending on what they are doing. So it might be it's a long-term project and they haven't got any further yet, but it's still ongoing. No, I'm thinking more of, is there anything on there that sort of strikes you? Particularly when we talked about RAG status. Given how embedded RAG status is on things like risk registers, what they've done here is they've tried to give different colours for different themes. So theme planning, theme inequality, theme health. Okay, these are all up here. The problem, of course, is if you're used to seeing a RAG colour, you look at this and don't think, oh, it's a planning issue. You look at this and think, oh, there's a problem here. And when you get to health, you go, oh, there's a big problem here because it's in red. But it didn't mean that it was in red. It's just the colour that they used to identify the sections. Blue, yellow, purple, red, and so on. So you need to be careful that you don't give the wrong impression. So they've done this for the right reasons, to try and show which section it comes under. But because those colours are so embedded elsewhere in terms of risk, they give the opportunity for them to be misunderstood. So you've got three big things in red. And it, as I say, it might just be me, but when I see something in red, I think, oh, I need to watch out for this. But of course it's not, it just happens to be the colour I've chosen. And when I see something in green, I think, oh yeah, that's fine, but it's not, it's just the colour they've chosen. So we have these. Do you want to take a shot at what the gear is supposed to mean? While you're typing up the answer to that, Mel's asked what level of risk would be added. Is it key risks only? And of course, that's part of the skill in creating these things. And it will depend at the level that you're at. So as you pointed out earlier, there might be multiple risk documents. This is the strategic risk. So these are the kind of big things. But there may be smaller things elsewhere. So you won't see something on here that says, we might not have cover for the weekend. But you might see something on here that says, we may have an issue with getting enough qualified staff. So getting enough qualified staff is a strategic risk available in this big document. Not having enough staff for the weekend is an operational risk that's probably looked at elsewhere. So again, it depends on the type of risk document. I'm not seeing anybody having any guesses for the gear. I'm not going to tell you what it is, because I want to make the point. If you can't look at a key and think, oh yeah, that means, I mean, you can look at green and go, yeah, okay, fair guess that that's okay. Tick, fair guess that that's done. Amber, fair guess, you need to watch out for this one. What they have done is they've put the key at the end. So the gear actually stood for not yet started. Now that I've seen that, and now that I know what it means, I'm still not convinced. I'm not convinced that a gear, if anybody can tell me why a gear stands for not yet started, I'd love to know. But give them credit because they have given the whole key and said exactly how the things are going to work. We're back to another question in the chat, and the question is about when presented to the board, what should be in this risk register that goes to the board? And again, that's a how long is a piece of string type question. So it's about the strategic risks for the organisation. So the question mentions strategy and financial risks. And yes, you can imagine the board being interested in those. And the other example given is day-to-day risk. Well, the board might be interested in those. This is a health and social care. And anybody that's watched the news will be well aware of the sometimes hysterical reporting that you can see around health. So the board might very much be interested about the day-to-day risks of staff not being available, beds not being available, that kind of stuff, because if nothing else, it feeds into the reputational risk for the whole organisation. So there's no, this should be here and this should be here. It will depend entirely on what the risk is, the type of organisation that you're in, the possible consequences it may have. And for them, a bad item on Reporting Scotland might be a huge risk for the organisation. David wants the not yet started to be a square. Yeah, I could live with a square. Maybe an empty square. But yes, I'm not convinced. The other thing that they've done is they've shown the order for the numbers here. So they've said it's always impact times likelihood. And I mentioned that in the previous one. Here, where they have them, and they have a 5 times 2, it's always impact times likelihood. That's clear from the matrix itself. It doesn't do any harm to make it really clear elsewhere as well. Any other questions about those? Okay, in that case, let me stop the recording. As ever, you will find this on the link to the meeting, but you'll also find it on YouTube once I get it uploaded.